everybody. My name is Kealy Spring. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. And today I have with me Andrew Kushnick, who I know actually through professional organizations here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Andrew was kind enough to introduce me to his brother, Greg, who's also a clinician on the East Coast, and I spoke with him as well. So looking forward to kind of speaking with you, Andrew, and learning a little bit more about yourself and how you practice. So without
Yeah,
further ado, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself, the niches you work with, and kind of go from there.
great. Thanks for having me, Keely. It's great to be here.
My pleasure.
Um, yeah, so the types of clients I commonly work with, usually people who are very stuck in their heads, in narratives, in their thoughts. So they're cognitive thinkers, they're analytical thinkers, and those thoughts can be distracting. They can keep them up at night, um, keep them from being able to concentrate at work. Um, and so, yeah, I would say that's like my typical uh, client. They need to be more in touch with what they're feeling and not just their thoughts. Lots of folks in tech specifically. Um, I'm writing a book on the mindset of um, the tech worker. So anyway, that's most of my practice. I'm in private practice as a marriage and family therapist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the tech industry here in the Bay Area is so big. So, I think the book will probably be well received because there's a lot of people in need. I definitely see a lot of tech as well being in the
Yeah,
Bay Area here. So I look forward to seeing that when it comes out. You'll have to let me know.
I will. Thanks.
Good.
Yeah.
Andrew, could you share with me how you decided to become a clinician? How did you come to this path?
Of course. Years ago, therapy helped me a lot. And I remember in the therapy room, there would almost be these two processes happening at once. I'd be answering the therapist questions and, participating in the session, but another part of me would be fascinated by the behind the scenes. Why was she asking the questions that she's asking? How does this all work? So that led me to kind of like a hobby at the time of reading self-help books, absorbing anything I could alongside talk therapy. Um, and then years later, well, I had been practicing law. I was an attorney for about 10, 11 years. And
Oh,
yeah, it was exciting. I was in the courtroom. I was a prosecutor for some of that.
okay.
Yeah, but I never found it to be truly fulfilling.
Hmm.
The legal system, yeah, it's kind of dysfunctional and unwieldy, and it doesn't always produce the best result, like a just result. Uh, and I also was never able to see the result of my work on a
Hmm.
day-to-day basis. It was really what I was doing was detached from, doing good for other people. So that that was frustrating. Yeah. And
Sure.
then years later, as you mentioned, my brother is a psychologist in Manhattan, and I started asking him more and more about his work because I was just thinking, what do I want to be doing? And he would tell me about his craft and his love for the work. And I just thought to myself, that sounds amazing. So I started to look into it more and found myself back in grad school again, and that led me on this path. And I'm so glad I did it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's quite the journey there. You know, detour to law, back to therapy.
All over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. So that said, what do you like about being a clinician? What do you like about being a therapist?
Hmm. Well, in contrast to my experience in the law, being able to see progress over time with my clients just feels so great. When they, as when they first come to us, they're just describing what's happening in their life. It's, what's not working, what's bugging them. And sometimes it's almost myopic. They can't even really picture like what life could be like. And so, yeah, seeing things change over time, seeing them talk about improved relationships and improved performance at work and really being able to find direction, um, or patterns not playing out the same way anymore. It feels great. Uh, yeah,
Like that privilege of watching somebody go through the journey, that like kind of healing growth process.
absolutely. Yeah, it's also I view clients as like a puzzle. Everyone
Mhm.
has different ways of
Yeah.
thinking and acting and ways that they respond to stress and the ways that they are in relationships, and it's so unique to everyone. And then there's what we bring. There's our schooling and our training, all these models and methods. So I think it's kind of like an intellectual exercise in a way to figure out, what do I have? Like, what can I do? What do I know
Yeah.
that I can bring to this person? Will it match with what they're needing? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the puzzle analogy. Well, I don't think it's an analogy, but um, I love puzzles as well. I think of clients often as puzzles, and that there's different pieces that maybe are in the wrong place or not being integrated in some way. And how do you kind of incorporate those things? It's definitely I like the piece too about the intellectual that you brought up, because it is an intellectual, like it's sometimes there's people that I think I'm having like a chess match with or something. Like there's this like intellectual kind of push and pull of like what would the research say? What does that actually translate to in the actual room with somebody? And how do we kind of bring that all together into one cohesive, integrated human whole?
It's so true.
Yeah.
And that back and forth, I think I've heard someone say in a training, we should be one step ahead of the client in terms of where they are, what they're comfortable with, their patterns that have been put in place over time. Like, parts of them will essentially push back on us. So we have to almost not go so far ahead of them to, where it's scary and really distressing, but just kind of like, hey, how about this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost a little bit of that window of tolerance, when somebody is kind of in that space and they can tolerate a little bit, but not too much.
Right. We don't want someone to feel like, oh, that's ridiculous, or the therapist really doesn't get me, or why aren't you listening?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the things.
All the
100%.
things.
Well, that leads me to my next question. What are some modalities that you practice in?
Yeah, I'd start with EMDR. When I got trained in attachment focused EMDR, I think it was 2017, it really transformed my practice. Um, Prior to then, I had been mostly cognitive, mostly analytical, I guess what you'd expect from an attorney.
Fair. Fair.
And then I realized that true change doesn't occur unless it's at the level of the brain.
Mm.
So when we're in childhood and adolescence, we develop these patterns, these ways of being, ways of interacting with our environment. Um, and it's encoded in neural pathways in our brain. And trauma gets lodged in the right side of the brain in fragmented, undigested form. And unless we actually link that to the rest of the brain, um, that part of the brain that contains narrative, um, like that can weave a story around your experience, then it just sits there waiting to be reactivated and re-triggered. So that's what I found, why EMDR um, is so helpful. It kind of rewrites the way that memories are stored in our brain and allows integration
Hmm.
again, so that, yeah, it's like a recording that's created long ago, and then new experiences, triggers in our environment can then, it's like you press play again and the recording happens all over again. The person feels it as if it's happening back. What happened back then, it feels like it's happening now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. And you mentioned, EMDR has come up in some of these conversations with others just because it is such a popular, well-evidenced modality. That said, I don't know about the nuance of that attachment piece. You were kind of speaking to it clearly in what you were just saying, but for
Hmm.
those who might be curious about how attachment EMDR is different than, traditional EMDR, could you maybe explain a little bit of that?
Absolutely. So the standard EMDR protocol has the therapist asking the client to identify the image, the emotion, the body sensation that they feel now when they think of a memory. Um, but the system can easily get overloaded, um, and the person can feel overwhelmed. So attachment focused EMDR pays special attention to a feeling of safety in the client in the moment. So we're tracking how they're doing and making sure that nothing feels like too much, that they're not getting re traumatized by thinking about what happened back then, um, and that they're really monitoring how they're doing moment by moment, to be able to um, let the bilateral stimulation in EMDR do its thing without really any interference, like without the system getting flooded. No, I just used a lot of jargon, but hopefully that makes sense.
No, I don't think it was too much jargon. I do think some of just to kind of go back to one of the terms we were just talking about is that window of tolerance. It's kind of what you're talking about, is making sure people are within that window of for EMDR purposes, so that they can feel safe and able to kind of explore those deeper, more triggering, potentially memories, moments, kind of.
Yes, because an EMDR client needs to be present with how they're feeling. They need to be noticing what comes up, as the EMDR, during sets of EMDR. Um, and actually, that leads into another portion of my work, which is parts work. Um, Internal family systems therapy is, one, I guess, a leading method of parts work. And the reason I added that to my practice is I found that different aspects of clients were interacting with the EMDR.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so for the client to be able to get in touch with what's happening, it optimizes EMDR. So, yeah. I'll give an example real quick.
Great.
I mean, I'm a perfectionist. A lot of us are perfectionists. And so, say there's a perfectionist part of a client and they started EMDR, and that means that it's very likely they're having this thought in the moment, like, am I doing this right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, am I doing this well enough? And it can be distracting, and it can even take over and almost hijack their experience to the point where they're not noticing the images, the sensations that naturally happen as they're doing EMDR. And
Mm-hmm.
so by working with that, we can get those parts to actually relax in effect
Mm-hmm.
and not feel like they need to take over in that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what we do. That's why I added parts work to EMDR. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I work with perfectionism often. It's one of my niches, and I haven't even thought about it in terms of the parts work, but maybe I will. That's very interesting, for sure.
Yeah, it's natural, it's understandable, and it's almost like a part of them that needs to be recognized and validated. There's a reason why a perfectionist part, for instance, or a self-critical part comes along and does its thing. It has good intentions. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I know from the research and things around perfectionism is there is a piece that comes largely from our childhoods and different things that we incorporate right into those ideas of what expectations are, what we're supposed to meet, where we're supposed to go, and how we're supposed to do things, that kind of get embedded. So I can see how that work like kind of beautifully, aligns there, for sure.
Absolutely. And that usually comes from messages we get from our parents, what we think as children we need to do to feel loved and to feel worthy. Yeah,
For sure. I appreciate you sharing that.
of
Uh,
course.
so what that said, I know that EMDR is a little bit more of a structured, one might say, style. What is a normal session with you look like? I mean, I would imagine it depends on what they're coming to you with and whether you're treating an individual or a couple dynamic, but could you speak to that
Sure,
a little bit?
of course. Yeah, there really is no typical session. Um, as you said, I work mostly in the afternoons and early evenings. So a lot of my clients are, putting an hour break on their schedule for, and it's in the middle of their workday. And very often they just came from a meeting like 10 minutes earlier and they're feeling it. Maybe it was like a frustrating meeting with their manager, or they're trying to code something and the code isn't compiling, or they just saw a text from, like upsetting text from their significant other or a friend, and so they're feeling it. So that actually can aid the work if we can work with what's happening in the moment, getting them to look inside, to listen inside, and notice what's happening within me right now. um, we can make use of it, and it actually benefits the trauma work. So I would say maybe a third of the time or more. Yeah, what the client is coming in with, like right when the session starts, we work with it. But sometimes if the mind is more clear and someone is, doing more okay, then we're just continuing on wherever we were in the work. So I work pretty heavily with trauma. So it might be getting them in touch with what's happening inside in general,
Mhm.
like that part's work, or it might be preparation for EMDR, which can include mapping out the traumas that we're working on that might be impacting them in the present day, or resourcing, resource tapping, which also prepares the system for EMDR. So anyway, no typical session, but it might involve any of that, and that's with individuals. I also do couples work as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned resourcing. So when you say that, could you just kind of explain to the audience what you're touching on there?
Of course. Yeah. Resourcing is a step in preparation for EMDR. It gives your brain the experience of what you needed back when the bad stuff happened, but didn't have. So, for instance, if a child feels controlled by a parent, or a child is afraid of a parent's angry outburst, or even just the expressiveness on their face, um, the child likely didn't feel safe or didn't feel like they had control back then. And the bilateral stimulation that we use with EMDR, so just because I haven't explained it, I commonly use tappers. It's like a colloquial term for these buzzers that you hold and they vibrate alternatingly, they buzz. Um, so that same bilateral stimulation, left, right, can be used in resourcing. And so what we do is we give you the experience, the feeling or the quality that you didn't have back then, but we give the brain that experience now. So for that child who felt, controlled or overwhelmed or afraid of a parent, we have the adult client think of people or situations or memories in which they did feel a sense of control or protection or safety. And we then use the tappers, and it creates neural pathways in the brain that links that resource with that feeling. And the brain doesn't care that, um, the brain doesn't care that these are like we're using your imagination. The brain just craves the experience of the safety, the protection, control. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do think all the research would say that memories are flawed, right? We've seen that's why eyewitness testimonies, all those kinds of things are deeply flawed because the brain just kind of fills in the gaps. And so what you're talking to is like kind of filling in those gaps in a healthier way so that the brain has something more, I keep going back to the word integrated, but this kind of integrated memory that is more healing or cathartic in some way.
Yes. And it also, that's an example of linking the trauma brain with the rest of the brain. Because again, when trauma happens, it just gets dispersed in fragmented form. So we may have the memory of the dad's angry face or of a loud voice, but it's not linked to the knowledge from the adult brain, the resourced brain. Like, I am safe. I'm okay now. I'm an adult now. Um, and so, yeah, filling in those gaps, um, yeah, is integrative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, super powerful. Thank you for clarifying, adding some flavor there. I appreciate it. I think it'd be helpful for people.
sure.
Um, okay, so is there anything in the therapeutic process that still surprises you, or when you're with clients or talking to other people, kind of anything? Is there anything that kind of still surprises you?
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Here I am talking about, again, all these terms, these trauma terms, EMDR, all this fancy terminology, and still people surprise me. The complexity, the diversity of what shows up, how people show up, like the unique flavor that each person brings in terms of beliefs and thought patterns and how they feel and what happens when they're stressed, what parts of them take over. Um, and yeah, you know, to make things more simple, we develop constructs in our brain. This is this. What we're seeing can be labeled as this. And just when I think I'm able to do that, just when I think I'm able to accurately label what I'm seeing, another session will happen and there'll be a curveball. And, just when I thought like, oh, this is a classic hypervigilant, part, uh, they'll introduce some other wrinkle and I'll have to rethink it. And I'm glad that happens because like they deserve to be seen for the unique, snowflake that we all are.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely feel similarly to what you're kind of describing there, for sure.
For sure. And yeah, and then, EMDR and other trauma modalities will work that much better if we're able to tailor it to exactly how they would say it and what the thoughts are and the beliefs are in them, not just what we've classically seen or read about.
Right.
Yeah.
There's less resistance when we use other people's language that they already have kind of incorporated into their own kind of modalities or mind kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Is there anything that you wish people knew or understood about therapy?
Mm. This will probably be kind of a stock answer. But that's okay. Um, it's not just for crazy people. It's not just for people who are really, really struggling.
Mhm.
Yes, it helps them too, but I feel like everyone can benefit, even people who are holding down jobs, doing okay, in relationships. Um, just there's sometimes people have a general feeling of discontent, and maybe it's hard to even pinpoint what it is, but they're not feeling like life is going the way they want it to, but there just needs to be little tweaks to what they're doing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's why I wish therapy was more widely available to more of the population because especially these days, the state of society, I think everyone could really, really benefit, not just people who could be diagnosed with
Yes.
some disorder. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think I agree with what you're saying there. I do think that's part of the medical model that we clinicians are kind of always coming up against, right? It's like, I don't work with insurances, but I do provide super bills, right? And they want a diagnosis and they want, all these kinds of things that kind of put people into these boxes. And then they're only going to provide reimbursement if you have some sort of diagnosis that they think is, correct or whatever, versus, kind of what you're describing. It's like, yeah, there's people on all parts of the spectrum in terms of needing help to work through maybe little things or to dive into kind of patterns, all the way up to kind of more actual diagnosable clinical, what that model would say is needed.
I agree. I think we call it like the worried well.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, people who, yeah, again, with the trauma work that I do, a lot of times people will just come in and they'll say, I'm a people pleaser, or I don't trust anyone, or or I get really angry. And if we were to pose those to an insurance company, they'd be like, okay, what diagnosis? That's not, none of those are diagnoses. We're not going to cover that.
Box. Which box are they in?
Which box? Let's reduce it to these
Yeah.
limited number of categories. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Okay, so final question kind of in this clinical area, and then I'm going to ask you some personal get to know you questions. What is a tool that we could share maybe with the audience that might be listening that could be accessible for them to maybe utilize or try?
Hmm. I would say early on in my work with a lot of clients, I introduced them to a concept from Dan Siegel. He's a psychiatrist at UCLA, author,
Very well known. Yeah.
very well known.
I'm going to see him at the Evolution of Psychology, I think, coming up in Anaheim at
Oh,
the
wow,
end.
that's great.
Yeah, he's always doing the rounds of, he's very, very prominent.
Yeah, he is.
Continue.
Yeah, no problem. And so he describes what happens when we label or put words to what we're feeling. And he says that essentially the left side of our brain sends soothing neurotransmitters to the right side of the brain, which almost has like an anesthetic effect. So when we do that for ourselves, or when someone does that for us, it actually feels good. Just having it named. It's maybe surprising that it works that way, but yeah, that's why I introduced that to many clients early on. See if you can actually tell yourself, oh, wow, I'm feeling upset right now. Or, oh, wow, my heart is beating really fast. I think I'm anxious right now. And again, it may sound dumb or it might sound silly, but it actually works. It actually has an effect.
Yeah, it's almost kind of stepping out of the experience of it to be able to name what is happening and see it um, from an external stance. I'm not
Yes.
sure. Have you ever heard of the book Emotional Agility by Susan Davis?
No,
She
no.
talks about this concept as well. And now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if she took it from Dan's work,
Huh.
uh, but she talks about the power of that naming as well, and getting it. She calls it data points, which people that are with tech people, I think it's a good kind
They
of
can relate.
phrasing. But that you see the feelings, the things going through your mind, the thoughts as feelings or thoughts, which is kind of what you're and naming it as such rather than owning that it is permanent. That's it, right? It's kind of, separating those out a little bit.
Yeah, it actually kind of dovetails with language from IFS as well, where you're in like an observer stance. You're observing what's happening within you. You're naming it as opposed to it completely taking over and flooding you and you're getting blended or hijacked, blended with it or hijacked by it, where the rest of your day feels like it's ruined. You can't think about anything else. You're just in it as opposed to, yeah, naming it to the point where it starts to dissipate
Yeah.
somewhat. Yeah.
Yeah. It gives it less power, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. It's kind
I
of,
like that emotional agility. I'll have to check that out.
yeah, it's a good one. It's one of the ones because it's accessible, I think, for the people again with more kind of data brains. They like the concept of feelings or thoughts as data points rather than, you know, that experience of it. But
Yeah.
I wonder if Dan and Susan David know each other,
I'm sure they all do.
They all do.
A lot of the greats within the therapy, mental health field have, yeah, collaborated and reference each other. It's, yeah,
Sure, for sure. They're
yeah,
always like, my friend Gabor Mate. And you're like, oh,
right.
it's a nice circle to be in.
Uh-huh.
Um, okay, Andrew, appreciate the clinical answers, and we're gonna pivot here a little bit to talk a little bit more to get to know you on a different level. Are you open to that?
Absolutely.
All right,
Let's,
great.
let's do it.
Okay, so my first question is, what is something that's making you happy these days?
Hmm. I will start with, I will say a TV show, White Lotus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
you saw the latest season.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would say with, again, these are dark times nationally and even globally, and we all need escapism. It makes sense to just want to be taken away. And it's, yeah, that show, I do think the first two seasons were better than the third one, but did you also?
I agree. I agree. I think yeah, there was just a different feel to it or something. But yeah, it's striking to me that show is very it's almost like watching reality TV in some ways because the
Hmm.
people are so like you can just see they feel really real.
Oh
There's a
yeah, it's their worst impulses. It's like
yeah,
people in their worst behavior. So it's
yeah,
just decadent and
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's it's a brilliant satire, I think, into, well, less, especially the most recent season. This theme of spirituality, and kind of aiming for these, the moral high ground or these principles, of Buddhism for some of the characters,
Sure.
but then will they cave into darker impulses
Yeah.
like the need for money, for instance? Yeah,
Things. Yeah, yeah,
things, material things.
yeah,
Yeah, in Western civilization. Yeah,
yeah,
it's great stuff.
yeah, for sure. Okay, what's your favorite app?
Favorite app? I'm gonna go therapy adjacent and mention Insight Timer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of meditation apps. People know Headspace and Calm. Insight Timer has these challenges that I really like these breathwork challenges, for instance, where um, literally it's just a way to regulate your nervous system, and it trains you to do that with these audio tracks. So that's just one part of it that I really like. But yeah, I think people should really be. It just takes a few minutes per day. um, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but uh,
No, but anybody listening, I agree with you. I think these things they can be done, and I'm always telling people, you got 2 minutes, like spend 2 minutes looking out a window or breathing, or it can be really accessible. And I would imagine Insight Timer, it's probably those small kind of chunks of time as well.
yes, it's like 5 minutes maybe. Yeah, it's like the rest of life will still be there. You're not gonna
Yeah,
lose out on anything.
for
Yeah,
sure, for sure.
yeah.
Okay, beach or mountains?
Uh, can I say both?
Yeah, for sure.
I love the mountains. I love hiking and skiing, but yeah, the beach also. Um, yeah.
Are you
I,
more of a tropical beach? This has come up in previous ones. People are like, no, I'm a northern beach, rocky cliff thing. Do you have a preference?
I would say tropical.
hmm
Yeah. I mean, I think of like Ocean Beach, and most of the year it's too cold to really enjoy it as a beach.
It's fogged over.
Fogged over and windy, the marine layer. Yeah.
Sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, what is one thing that movies never get right?
I would say I'm thinking of like romantic comedies or movies that depict relationships. It's often pretty simplistic and it doesn't capture the complexities. Like things are not, euphoric or horrible. There's a
hmm
lot of awkward in between, just the mundane day to day where you try to keep the magic alive, you try to keep the spark alive, and there's moments of real life that just kind of get in the way, and you get tired and you get cranky, come home from work. Uh, and I don't think that's captured really well. The sex is always perfect, like nothing, like everything just goes, it's all scripted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
There's
I wish.
it's always the same.
What's that?
It's always like the same arc, right? And like
Same
not
arc.
like neatly tied up in a bow kind of concepts with relationships for sure.
Yeah.
It's like
So
they're super messy. That's not
yeah,
a reality.
but that doesn't make for such a good story. Just the fact that it's messy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, what's the best way to relax?
Uh, this will sound like another stock answer, but nature. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of like Mount Tam, like the Dipsy Trail, where you get
Yes.
to this point and you see the whole Bay Area actually, but it's so quiet,
Yeah.
and it's just
Yeah.
so peaceful. It's like a spiritual
Hmm.
moment, and to me, that just gives your body, your nervous system, this feeling of awe, and
Hmm.
it really feels great. So maybe that's not truly relaxing, but it's feels really good.
Yeah, I think it is. I love being in nature and kind of hiking. Speaking of Mount Tam, have you ever gone and done the mountain play up
No.
of Marin? So it's like basically get up there. There's some parking, but they shuttle people mostly up there. And then you have those views of the whole bay and all that kind of stuff, and it's a play there. So
Oh,
do it
a
every
theater.
summer. Yeah, they've got like one play that they run every summer. So I saw Wizard of Oz there. It's really cool.
Nice.
Experience. Yeah, they even had a plane come by with a sign that said "Surrender, Dorothy," like right at the right time. So
Uh-huh.
it's amazing. You're in nature, you're watching a play, and it's good
That's
stuff.
really
But
cool.
check it
Wow,
out.
what a setting too.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Um, okay. What is a dream trip location for you?
I'll say New Zealand.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I I was in Australia years ago, and I should have combined the two, but um, yeah, New Zealand. It's just like the glaciers, and it just looks like the landscapes just look so exotic and different, and it's disconnected from many of the world's conflicts, and so it just looks amazing. It looks beautiful.
Yeah, it's the fjords down there. So I've been to New Zealand. I lived in Australia a bit too.
Mm.
Love that whole down under area, but the fjords, kind of what you're talking about, are like these just beautiful, and you ride a boat through these, and they're just these huge things that have been carved out by glaciers, actually, right?
Wow.
It's just like stunning, stunning geography there. Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll have to make it there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff for sure. Okay, what advice would you give your younger self?
Advice I would give my younger self. Well, this will be the title of one of those self-help books that I was referencing. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Ah,
Yeah, we always feel like something that happened, something that someone said is so consequential. We can't imagine, that it'll get better. We get absorbed in it. We obsess over things. It keeps people up, and people just don't realize that they'll wake up the next morning and it might feel a little bit better, and that things don't matter as much as we think they do. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. It's a good book. Also, it's a small stuff.
Yeah, it
I
is.
know, but yeah. Great. Okay, out of the four seasons, which is the best?
That's easy. Summer.
Summer.
Hmm.
So you're really looking forward to the next couple months here. Just
Oh, yeah.
yeah, is it the weather?
It's the weather, the longer days. People just seem happier.
Mhm.
Um,
True story.
yeah, just the feeling of the sun on your skin. Just people just seem to make more time for leisure when the weather's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as we get some rain here and
Fair. Yeah.
there.
Balance it out a little bit. Want everything to stay green and lush and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. What would be the worst superhero power to have?
Uh, all right, we'll go back to another TV show, True Blood. There
Uh-huh.
was there was a character, Sookie, and she worked in like a restaurant, diner, or tavern type place, and she could hear other people's thoughts. Did you see it?
Yeah. I watched that whole series. Yeah, it's a good one.
Okay.
I didn't read the books though. I've heard the books
Mm,
do a little bit more in depth on some of those characters, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. Um, it's like we already have so much visual stimuli, or we just know of other people's suffering.
Hmm.
And so that can be overloading for some people to begin with, but then to actually hear all the thoughts that accompany it in real time, that would be a lot.
It'd be very flooding, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think there's good uses for people being able to edit their thoughts when they speak with you, right? Like we hear a lot of people's thoughts that they don't maybe share with other people, and
Right.
you know, I don't think any thought is bad, but I do think that yeah, some of them are not going to help us, or might get in our way or whatever. So if you're just getting that stream constantly, that's a lot to take in.
It can be flooding for the person who's experiencing the thoughts
Mhm.
and maybe the person who's hearing them. So maybe some editing
Fair.
can be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, what's an animal that resonates for you?
I'll say a dog. I'm thinking most people with their dogs, they love their dog unconditionally, and the dog usually does the same in
Yeah.
reverse. And, the dog has no agenda, maybe other than getting fed, but just wants to love and be loved. And that's just nice
Yeah.
in general. I think of all the complications that I hear about,
Yeah.
in relationships, working with individuals or couples, and so many things that come up that get in the way of that unconditional unconditional positive regard, we therapists call it.
Yeah,
So that seems like a dog's world.
for sure. For sure. Okay. Final answer or final question. I always want to say final answer, but final question.
I'm on a game show now.
I know.
What's my final
Um,
answer?
when you look back at your life, what do you hope you'll be able to say about it?
That I was brave. So many of us get stuck in patterns, uh, held back by fears. Yeah, living our lives the same way, day after day, week after week, and people are afraid to make changes. And so, yeah, changes in relationships, changes in ourselves, changes maybe in the way that we work, uh, different ways of looking at things. So, yeah, I'm hoping I'm able to say that I took chances and I was brave. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you, Andrew. You are officially seen.
All
So
right.
appreciate you sharing this time with me. For anybody watching, I will include Andrew's information in the notes of this so you can reach out and have a further conversation with him if you'd like. Andrew, anything here before we hop off?
No, I just want to thank you, Keely, for doing this. I think this is such a great idea. The whole idea for your video podcast series, the therapy is portrayed in, TV shows and the media and in books, and people, it often gets sensationalized or it's often unrealistic. So I think it's really great to give people the chance to see, what we're really like and what the work, what therapy is really like. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you being a part of this journey that we're all kind of on, and part of the community and the network of clinicians that I know and trust. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.